Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're peeling back the layers on a pretty interesting ranking. It's the 10 heaviest horror movies of all time.
And our mission here isn't just to talk about films that, you know, make you jump.
No, not at all. We're really trying to figure out what specific blend of psychological, emotional, or even political misery turns a movie from just being scary into something that's genuinely traumatic.
Something that really sticks with you for years.
Exactly. And we need to set the boundaries for this discussion like right out of the gate because horror is such a huge umbrella.
It is. It means so many different things.
But our source material makes this great distinction. On one side, you have the easy stuff, the roller coaster horror.
Right. Think of a classic slasher like Friday the 13th.
Perfect example. It's a blast. You scream, you throw your hands up, and then, by the next morning, it's basically forgotten.
But the films we're diving into today,
these are labeled car crash horror movies. And the idea is that the sheer unblinking brutality means you, the viewer, feel like you're sitting right inside one of the vehicles.
that analogy is just perfect.
Yeah.
It really captures the depth of this ranking. For us, heavy means these films are deeply upsetting, not just because they show you shocking things.
Right. It's not just about the visuals.
It's because they wrestle with truly upsetting, complex, and potentially debilitating human themes. The visual shock is temporary, but the thematic weight, that's what gets them on this list.
So we're not chasing simple body counts. We're looking at how themes like, consuming grief, crippling paranoia, societal collapse, how those things elevate these films.
We're going to start with the films that focus on the most personal kind of terror, the inner collapse.
And that brings us to number 10, Rosemary's Baby from 1968.
A foundational text for this kind of horror.
The staying power of this film is just remarkable. I mean, nearly 60 years on, it feels perpetually relevant. You're watching a woman expecting a baby who slowly realizes her whole environment is hostile.
And her neighbors are just a little off at first. That's the key, that gradual escalation.
It's such a masterclass in the slow burn. The director just establishes this domestic vulnerability. She's reliant on her partner, her new surroundings.
And then he deliberately chips away at her perception of reality. The terror isn't a monster in the closet. It comes from the people she should be able to trust implicitly.
And that, I think, is the core of its heaviness.
The gaslighting.
The relentless gaslighting. As a viewer, you're constantly grappling with it. Is this a literal external conspiracy, or is it, just intense paranoia?
And you're forced to live in her uncertainty. That ambiguity paralyzes you, which is a far heavier emotional toll than just a sudden fright.
So if we push that idea of psychological ambiguity and domestic failure to an even more chaotic extreme, we get to number 9.
Possession, from 1981.
The title itself suggests something supernatural, but a bit like The Shining, it intentionally leaves you in that gray area.
Is it a literal possession, or is it an allegory for just the most extreme psychological breakdown you can imagine as a relationship dissolves?
And the source material really focuses on that family dynamic. You have a husband, a wife, and their young son.
What makes this film so mortifying is that both parents are spiraling into these dangerous, unstable states at the same time.
That's such a good point. It's not just one person's descent you're watching.
You're watching the entire family unit just cannibalize itself. The sheer unpleasantness of watching that relationship completely self-destruct is what earns its heavy ranking.
I mean, the psychological mess of their marriage is honestly more painful to watch than some of the movie's more, full-on horror scenes.
So Possession is about the death of a marriage. The number 7, Don't Look Now, from 1973, is about the limits of human endurance when you're faced with absolute grief.
This is a film about two parents trying to navigate just the awful struggle of a child's accidental death.
And it's often described as a psychological drama that only really flirts with horror.
Right, until the very end. The real weight isn't about scares, it's about confronting that misery and asking if their relationship can even survive a loss like that.
The heaviness comes from this profound sense of loss that just pervades every single frame. It's slow, it's almost surrealistic at times, but the emotional truth of their struggle anchors the dread.
And it saves its biggest, most visceral scare for that shocking ending, but the foundation of its heaviness is just the agonizing portrayal of grief that comes before it.
Which is a perfect lead into number 5, Hereditary, from 2018. It takes that same element of grief and just cranks the dial way past 11.
You're so right. Initially, you feel like you're watching a contemporary drama about a troubled family dealing with a death, something with the emotional realism of Don't Look Now.
But this film is so much more cruel. The director, Ari Aster, establishes that raw, recognizable human grief, the kind of pain we can all understand.
And then he uses that vulnerability to make the character suffer in these increasingly cosmic and, frankly, unfair ways.
The movie doesn't just intensify. It becomes so much worse than you could have possibly imagined. That familiar sadness turns into something supernatural and completely inescapable.
And that's why it has this reputation for being soul-crushing. The suffering is just unrelenting, and because you've invested in the family's grounded, real pain, when the supernatural horror kicks in, the devastation is just amplified.
That's a strong point of transition. We've talked about the trauma of, the inner collapse.
Right, paranoia, grief, the failure of the family.
So now let's pivot and look at the films that project that kind of devastation outward, using horror to make a statement about society or humanity itself.
Okay, let's start with number 8, Mother, from 2017. This movie caused such a firestorm because it quickly devolves from this quiet domestic drama into what our source calls absolute and savage anarchy.
The heaviness here is the relentless, sustained nature of the chaos. The critique even suggests that the horrible things that happen are so numerous that knowing what's coming would actually make a rewatch more stomach-churning.
That's a really unique kind of dread, isn't it? Knowing makes it worse.
It is, and while you could argue the underlying allegory is, admittedly not very subtle, the sheer scale of the chaotic collapse and the emotional toll it takes puts it squarely in this heavy category.
And that whole concept that knowing the ending makes it worse is the perfect segue to number 6, The Mist from 2007.
Based on a Stephen King novella. But the movie's conclusion is a pretty major difference from the book, and considerably more miserable.
The initial premise is classic King, right? People trapped in a supermarket by these weird Lovecraftian creatures in a mist.
You think the threat is external, monstrous,
Yeah.
obvious. But the film complicates that really fast by exploring the idea that, maybe the real monsters are the humans.
Right, they turn on each other, driven by fear and failing leadership. But what truly lands this film at number 6 is that final, devastating act.
Yes. That ending is cited as the main reason for its ranking. It's just an act of profound, utterly unforgivable hopelessness.
It strips away any catharsis you might have been expecting. The despair of that final reveal is just crushing.
It's just an existential nightmare.
Moving higher up the ranking, we hit number 4. And this is a tough one. Cannibal Holocaust from 1980.
It's heavy on two very distinct fronts.
First, you can't talk about it without mentioning the controversy.
No, you can't. The film is notorious, and the violence is particularly obscene because it depicts real-life animals being killed in unflinching detail. And that's something that, rightly, makes a lot of viewers just turn away immediately.
Absolutely, for good reason. But then there's that second front, the critique, which is why it's on a list like this.
Exactly. It's technically very innovative as an early found footage film, and it uses all that horrific content for a satirical purpose. It's a savage look at media sensationalism and desensitization.
It's asking who the real savages are. The people in the remote jungle or the film crew exploiting them?
Which creates that critical division. The source notes. The extreme graphic stuff upsets your stomach, but the societal commentary, the critique of media ethics, is what upsets your mind.
And that brings us to number 2, Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom. A film with a reputation as a beyond notorious art house film.
The plot is almost unbearable in its simplicity. It's about fascists who kidnap, degrade, torture, and then kill young people. The viewing experience is just incredibly dense and difficult.
But similar to Cannibal Holocaust, the ranking highlights that the director used this extreme depravity for a specific, politically motivated reason.
It's a savage critique of power, of fascism, of corruption. The film uses human suffering as a metaphor for the total corruption of political authority.
But does that political intent make the sheer density of the abuse any easier to handle?
And according to this ranking, no. It remains an immense, almost insurmountable emotional burden for a viewer, regardless of the artistic justification. That's the weight that drives this high ranking.
Okay, so let's wrap up with the final 2 entries. These focus on inescapable dread and just relentless, uncompromising reality.
At number 3, we have Twin Peaks, Firewalk with Me from 1992.
For anyone who knows the TV show, this film is a prequel. It details the events leading up to and including the murder of Laura Palmer.
Which is the mystery that launched the entire series.
So the horror here isn't a mystery because the audience already knows the outcome. You are forced to spend 2 hours watching a character march toward a fate you know is horrific and inevitable.
Knowing what's coming creates this pervasive, immediate dread that makes the whole thing particularly harrowing. It represents David Lynch at his darkest and most uncompromising.
It's emotionally brutal. It's less like a mystery and more like an unflinching document of suffering.
And the heavy element is not surprise or shock, but the inexorable weight of that impending tragedy. You suffer right alongside her, knowing her struggle is ultimately futile.
And finally, number 1, the highest-ranked film, Angst, from 1983.
It really lives up to its name.
It does. It's a crime horror movie about a serial killer carrying out a home invasion.
The consensus is that while a lot of horror films are grim, Angst is just relentlessly grim and unpleasant. But the reason it's number 1 is driven by one singular factor.
The realism.
The realism. It just feels way too real. The filmmaking choices, the subjective camera that's focused on the killer's internal monologue, the raw, almost documentary-like cinematography, they refuse to give you any comfortable distance.
You go into it expecting a genre film with certain rules, but the lack of typical structure and the sheer unpleasant immediacy just elevates it. It's one of the heaviest films ever made, regardless of genre.
Simply because it forces you to feel like a direct, helpless observer of an actual horrific event.
So after all that, what does this entire ranking tell us?
I think it confirms that the heaviest, most impactful horror is driven by this underlying thematic misery, whether it's profound grief, political failure, or that overwhelming psychological realism.
It's not about the superficial jump scares or gore for its own sake.
Right. The power of these films is that they stick with you, because they make you feel awful, not just about what's on screen, but about real-world concepts.
The most upsetting films, like Angst with its realism or Salò with its social brutality, force you to confront realities that far outlast the viewing experience.
They don't just shock you, they sort of change your perspective on humanity's fragility.
And we've touched on several films here, especially The Mist and Twin Peaks, where knowing the ending actually makes the viewing experience so much worse.
Which raises a final provocative thought for you to consider. When is dread, that heavy knowledge of suffering that's yet to come? When is that a heavier emotional burden than a surprise shock? What truly inflicts more lasting pain on a viewer? The unexpected sudden horror or the relentless inevitability of the one you know is coming?